Hello, everyone. SBC Media Managing Editor Jessica Welman here, and I just can't quit talking about the federal government. We're back for more on today's episode of iGaming Daily as the issue of sports event contracts heads to federal court in several states. We're going to break down the arguments around these sports event contracts, how the cases are going, and why the CFTC may not be the ally the industry hopes it's going to be. All right, before we get started, iGaming Daily is brought to you by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. I've already mentioned who I am. I am joined by media manager Charlie Horner, who is hiding what I am sure is a smug smile that, once again, I'm talking about the thing I said we never were really going to talk about.
Yeah, I didn't want to remind you again, but considering that you've already brought it up, then yeah.
I know.
It's been an interesting
I
few
know
months.
what I am. I know that I have a problem, and admitting you have a problem is the first step towards fixing it. But we also this is a really unique situation, and it's one that is going to continue to, play out in the courts as well as at the federal level. All right. If we go back, I think I've got a link to the previous episode we did about these in the description below. I believe we've talked about election betting or election event contracts as well. So I'm not going to recapitulate what an event contract is. In January, sports contracts started cropping up at Kalshi and other places where essentially you can own a position on whether or not the Cincinnati Bengals are going to win a game. It's not unlike Betfair, like what you guys have, where you can kind of trade on winning or losing with other people, right? That's essentially how Betfair works, right?
Yeah, it's an exchange.
Yeah, so it's essentially an exchange market. You own a position on a contract. It all started with the weather. It's a good read if you ever want to just go down that rabbit hole. Once they started doing sports, though, people started to get angry. Nevada Gaming Control Board was the first to send a cease and desist because they're just like, yo, this is sports betting and you need a license to do this. Unsurprisingly, New Jersey, the second state to do this. And we learned this week that Maryland had also sent a cease and desist. There are cease and desists from Ohio and Illinois as well. There are now 3 lawsuits. I feel like the count from Sesame Street, 3 lawsuits by Kalshi. They have sued the regulators in Nevada, New Jersey, and now Maryland, saying that what they're doing is governed by the federal government and that the state can't do anything about it. This is just a big civics lesson for you, right, Charlie? Have you grasped the gist of it at all, or?
Well, almost. I'm just waiting for my law degree to arrive, to be honest.
You deserve it at this point, I think. I mean, yeah, here's the blanket. We are not lawyers. We are interpreting these, but nothing we're saying is like binding legal advice.
Yeah, that's important to note.
Yeah, so here there's a thing called the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution. It sounds really cool. It's less interesting once you break it down, which is essentially that in an instance that a state law and a federal law are in conflict with one another, the federal law generally prevails in a court of law. There are some things around this that kind of determine enforceability, but it's something that gets argued in cases all the time that outside of gaming. That's getting invoked here. But the argument put forth by most of the states so far has been, yeah, here's the thing. These laws aren't necessarily in conflict with one another. The law at the federal level being the Commodities Exchange Act of 1936, and state gaming regulations. So the Commodities Exchange Act came up with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, who oversees all of these things. When we say these markets are regulated, I think we've talked about this before. It's not like sports where you have to take a sports category to the Gaming Commission and they explicitly approve, yes, you can do this. The process is self-certifying, which is kind of like a mail away law degree, right? Like, no, I read all of the things. Don't worry. they put up these contracts, and until the CFTC tells them, no, that doesn't count, it's considered certified and regulated.
So the CFTC would have to say, no, you can't put sports contracts on your platform before they can take it down. It doesn't have to go through the CFTC before they actually put it up in the first instance.
Exactly. And that's what we saw in the election situation, was that the CFTC intervened and it's like, nah, this is not acceptable. And that is currently at the appeals level in court. They have not intervened yet. However, we do know that there's this roundtable coming up at the end of the month where numerous stakeholders across a lot of different spaces want to discuss what the future of sports event contracts are. The tribes and their organizations have filed quite a few letters. Sports betting operators, casinos, all of them are just like, this is our turf and you don't get to supersede state law. Things that have come up in these arguments on kind of the perimeter and not in the actual legal briefs themselves, though, are that there are actually other federal laws we have to consider here. One is the Wire Act about, gambling across state lines, interstate, not intrastate gaming. And the other one, Andrew Kim, who is a great follow on this subject, by the way, he's on Twitter at AK Hoya87. Somebody went to Georgetown, I'm assuming. Hoya is how you spell Hoya, for those who are unfamiliar. Really sharp stuff. And he had written pointing out that the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act is another one that you're going to have to consider because you've conferred certain privileges onto tribes that you are now letting somebody else do in states, and that might be in conflict at the federal level as well. You following along so far? This
is a lot of legislation to keep up with.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't know where this is going to go. And what was interesting is, so right now where we stand, Kalshi's filed these lawsuits, and as part of the lawsuit in each state, they've sought a preliminary injunction for the court to say, no, you can stay online. I believe we were talking about this, right? Where I was like, they were saying like, oh, it's so expensive for us to geofence. Who knows if that's even technologically possible. In Nevada, they won on the temporary injunction. The court agreed that there was a reasonable chance that they succeed. And in the meantime, while this court is, while the case is moving forward, they can keep operating. And let's be honest, the judge was very pro CFTC on this. It was Judge Andrew Gordon. He basically was like, listen, the CFTC is clearly in charge of this particular group, and you can't say that you're in charge of them. However, this was the piece of the response that I thought was really interesting. He said, Kalshi is, in some sense, proceeding at its own risk and creating its own harms. Things might turn out differently with election contracts if the D.C. Circuit Court rules against Kalshi or if the CFTC takes action against Kalshi's sports contracts, he noted. But for now, I will preserve the status quo, which is that these contracts are legal under federal law. In the case of that Nevada made against Kalshi, they kind of used their own words against them from this election case. They were saying, listen, in that case, you specifically mentioned gaming. And you specifically said, these are not gaming. It's very clear that Congress never wanted gaming to be a part of what event contracts are. And there are other things. They don't want you to bet on if somebody, or have contracts on if somebody's going to get murdered or somebody's going to try to shoot the president. Those markets are kind of off limits too. It's not just a free for all on these. The New Jersey argument was a little more complex and a little more nuanced. And the thing that Matthew Platkin, the Attorney General of New Jersey, brought up is he's not even sure these technically count as what is called a swap, which is kind of the category that these contracts fall under. Any idea what one of the defining factors of a swap is, Charlie?
Go on, indulge me.
I was like, you have no clue, right? So swaps entail a couple of things. And in this case, the most important part is a swap is any agreement, contract, or transaction that provides for the purchase, sale, payment, or delivery that is dependent on the occurrence, non-occurrence, or the extent of the occurrence of an event or contingency associated with, here's the part that you should pay attention to, a potential financial, economic, or commercial consequence. Now, if you and I were to have a thumb war match right now, the argument New Jersey has is there is no commercial consequence of who wins this thumb war match. So it doesn't count as a swap. To kind of extrapolate that larger, a game of soccer, a game of baseball, a game of basketball, people buy tickets to the event in advance. There's no real commercial impact winning or losing a single game.
Or is there?
Or is there? I mean, I think you could make an argument that, like, if you win the Super Bowl, that is a commercially advantageous thing for the team that wins.
Yeah.
You get to sell a bunch of merch. You're going to have ticket sales go up. You're going to have economic consequences of it, right?
Yeah, I think if even aside from the Super Bowl, just the playoffs in general, or any NFL game that could contribute to a team getting into the playoffs, because if a team wins a game to qualify for the playoffs, fans are going to buy tickets for the playoff games. They're going to go and buy food. They're going to go and buy drinks. They're going to buy merchandise, and that contributes to economic activity. So I can see the argument to say that these might just about qualify as swaps because they are contributing, however tangentially, they are contributing economically.
Yeah, win-loss record determines your draft, and the NFL draft is coming up. And if you really, really suck, it actually can be very beneficial for you drafting a real stud at the number one pick. When we get back from this break, I'm going to give you another wrinkle as to why these might be considered swaps by the CFTC. So take a quick pause and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to iGaming Daily. So one of the other arguments about swaps as a commercial entity came from an interesting source, which is Brian Quintenz. This last name's a struggle. Quintenz. I think I'm doing it right. But he is the current nominee to take over the CFTC. He has not been confirmed yet. Right now, Caroline Pham is still acting CFTC chair. Lots have been made about, like, oh, he's on Kalshi's board, which he is. He is very pro-crypto, and I think there are plenty of people that will scrutinize any person that Trump puts up for nomination for things. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We're in that sort
you
of...
guys in particular love to be critical of this in our office. I will say this man's pretty qualified. He actually was originally appointed by Obama to be not the chairperson, but one of the commissioners of the CFTC. And then when Trump took office the first time, he finished up that process and appointed him. So he's been on both sides of the aisle. He is very progressive and kind of pro-crypto. That part is pretty inarguable. And a past opinion about sports contracts in which he disagreed with his fellow commissioners brought up this commercial consequence thing. And he kind of pointed out something that is a pretty decent argument. Once I read it, I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. Once you repeal PASPA and legalize sports betting in 35 odd states, there are economic consequences to even the smallest of games because it determines the economic hold of a sports book. I'm sure we'll be on a pod here soon, Charlie, where I tell you why March Madness revised a bunch of guidance downwards on these Q1 earnings reports or Q2 forecasts.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good point that, yeah, if sports books either make money, which then provides tax dollars to the state, or they don't. And that is based on the results, which are the subjects of these contracts. So again, it's another argument in favor of these being swaps and qualifying.
And here's the thing, if he gets appointed and confirmed, the guy in charge of the agency that makes a decision whether or not to enforce this on the CFTC side of things probably is going to hold the same opinion he held in 2021.
Yes. I mean, the political situation in the US has kind of melted everyone's brains, I think, and made...
Correct.
I don't think I'm being controversial there, but is this a controversy in the United States that Quintense is a board member at Kalshi and is nominated for the CFTC? Because from our side of the Atlantic, that seems like a big conflict of interest. I know and I understand that he is qualified and is an expert in the field, but that does feel like a conflict.
So it's kind of like what we were talking about the other week with the Florida thing, right? Like the best people to be in charge are the people who are knee deep in this. And the same way, like if you leave the regulatory side to go into the private sector, what else are you going to do?
Sure.
It kind of, the inverse is true as well, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In the United States, you do have to recuse yourself. Like if he takes this job, he has to step down. Okay. He can't be on the board anymore. Sure. You can't have a job that's like, you can't be making money in the private sector that you're also regulating. We at least have those rules. But yeah, it's just one of those things. You recuse yourself and you step down. We've written a bit about it in regards to Tillman Fertitta, who owns, Station Casinos, has very in-depth investment in Wynn right now as a stockholder. I think he can still hold those stocks, but like he can't run the company that he runs and also take this. He's been proposed to be the ambassador to Italy, which is a job I would kill for.
Yeah.
Think of the food. Yeah, he would have to step down from that in order to take that job. So that's how you kind of eliminate the conflict of interest thing. But yeah, this is a guy who got done being a regulator and went and put his knowledge to use in the private sector, and now he is coming back. And I think, to me, I know it's this huge conflict of interest to you guys, but it's just a cultural thing. The same way I think like markets on the Pope are really weird and creepy. Like we would just never have those, Although I'm sure I guarantee you there are event contracts on the next Pope.
Oh yeah. I bet if I loaded up Kalshi at the moment.
I'm not going to do next Pope. It's just a cultural thing here. Like, people got to have jobs, man. So you step down from them and that's it. What I don't understand is the full timeline on when we're going to get to him, because again, they've got a lot of confirmations to get through and I don't know the priority on this one. But in the meantime, like Caroline Pham, similarly kind of pro-crypto, pro-progressive event contracts. So I think kind of the takeaway here is that from the CFTC side, I'm not sure there's going to be action on their side saying, like the judge cautioned, you can't do this. What'll be interesting is on the court side where they land, because really what Andrew Kim was saying was that Nevada didn't put a particularly compelling argument forward, whereas New Jersey did kind of a more robust job. So as these cases move on and more gets argued, there is still plenty of opportunities for the states to prevail. I think this first decision certainly bodes well for Kalshi, but you've got now 3 different judges making choices about this based on gaming laws in 3 different states.
Yeah, gaming laws in 3 different states, and then all of the other federal laws that we've discussed earlier. So it could be it could get quite messy. But another thing that I just wanted to ask about from the outside is, we mentioned earlier the CFTC roundtable that's set to take place, and it does feel like guidance from the CFTC is necessary. It would just clear a lot of this mess up. When can we expect this to happen, and what are those discussions going to be like?
It's kind of like an MGC meeting. They're going to have a chat on April 30th. There will be no decisive action on April 30th. This is more just a fact-finding, exploratory. I think I've read somewhere it'll kind of look like a hearing where there's testimony on both sides for the CFTC to consider, take in, and make an assessment on. And I'm sure the lawyers at the CFTC, of which there are a whole new set of them as of January, I think there were quite a few positions. Like, I know the lawyer that argued the election case in court in January basically was not in that job something like 3 days later with the appointment of Caroline Pham.
So, yeah, we can't expect anything concrete on April 30th.
Yeah, we're still a ways away.
Yeah.
It's a very early goings on this one, but in the courts, this is going to go the distance, I think. It's entirely possible that it gets appealed to the Supreme Court as the years go on, because at the heart of this is, if you can just do event contracts, who's ever going to get licensed? You know, you're going to fundamentally implode the industry. And you've got casinos, you've got tribes, you've got anti-gambling people, regulators. They're all on board with making sure that this doesn't happen at an expanded level. So it'll be something we continue to track and write relentlessly about. For you non-Americans out there, I actually did a piece on SBC News on Tuesday that breaks down the whole what is an event contract and stuff. So if you want a good explainer, I'll throw that in the description below as well, so you can check that out. Check out everything else that's going on. Charlie's had a ton of cool content on SBC Americas lately about another unregulated industry, the world of sweeps. So check that out and check back in tomorrow for another episode of iGaming Daily.